Never sleep on the beach. A group of tiny people attacked a fat man, capturing him as a prisoner. When the fat man woke up, he saw 5 tiny people standing on his body, all dressed in military uniforms, holding megaphones and shouting at him, "Long live Lilliput." The fat man noticed that his body was tightly bound with ropes, and the other end of the ropes was connected to wooden sticks inserted into the ground. The tiny people had built a wooden bridge on his body, and even constructed 2 high platforms preparing to attack him. The fat man was furious, struggling with all his might. Suddenly the ground was shaken with his actions. He struggled to stand up, breaking several ropes. With a heavy swing of his right arm, he uprooted the tiny people's giant construction, and some of the tiny people directly fell off. The fat man wanted to run away, but General Edwardian rode in on a horse, throwing a spear that pierced the fat man's foot. And then the tiny people used a hook to catch the fat man's huge boxer shorts, pulling it hard, exposing half of his buttocks, and he fell backward, his enormous body directly crushing one of the tiny people. Landing in the anal region, the tiny people captured a human, and General Edwardian used a supersized flatbed truck to transport the men to the city. Citizens came to watch. Having never seen such a huge giant, the man was mistaken for an enemy spy, and brought to the king. A mechanical arm stood the man upright. And my goodness, the man was half a head taller than the king's palace. The king was also somewhat puzzled. So he decided to imprison the man in a cave, feeding him dry straw every day, treating the man like a cow. It turned out the man's name was Gulliver, and he was a junior employee at a travel company. In order to win the favor of his crush, Darcy, he volunteered to take her place on a sea voyage, to explore the secrets of a tourist attraction. However, Gulliver fell asleep while reading a model book on the ship, and he didn't know how far they had sailed. They encountered a sea tornado, and Gulliver was sucked into a vortex of water, which brought him to the Lilliput. Also imprisoned with him was Horatio, the tallest person in Lilliput, who had been imprisoned for pursuing the princess. The two of them understood each other for being different, so quickly became good friends. The king decided to send Gulliver to work on the farmland. Have you ever seen a giant plowing the fields? The man's body was covered in steel wires, and his joints and neck were locked by machines. He dragged a metal plow that weighed 1 ton behind him, and every step was extremely difficult. He was controlled by the general. If he disobeyed, the big pincers on his nose would tighten. Gulliver became a slave in Lilliput. He was used as a plow ox because of his massive figure. At this moment, enemy spies sneaked into Lilliput's territory, setting a big fire, preparing to distract the country and kidnap the princess, threatening Lilliput to surrender. The general immediately went to rescue, and Gulliver, with uncoordinated steps, rushed to the city walls. Horatio took the opportunity to free Gulliver, releasing all the mechanisms of his restraints. At this time, the princess had been kidnapped, and Gulliver appeared just in time, with his gigantic meatball-like face. He scared away the enemy soldiers, picking them up with his fingers and his pinky up, and throwing them into the pool. He lifted the princess in his palm, and carried her to the platform. At the same time, the king was trapped in a sea of fire. Have you ever seen someone extinguishing a fire with urine? Gulliver ran forward and pried open a window with his bare hands. As a result, he got burned and scalded. But the fire was fierce. Seeing that the king was about to be engulfed in flames, there was no time to find water. Gulliver gritted his teeth, took off his big shorts, and directly released a torrent of urine, which was so powerful that it instantly extinguished the fire. The king and general were also drenched in urine, suffused with an unpleasant smell. How could urine be used to put out a fire? The general wanted to pick on Gulliver. Then Gulliver turned around and guess what? In this way, Gulliver saved the king, and became a great hero, receiving the love of all the tiny people. Horatio also benefited from Gulliver's heroic action, and was released from imprisonment. From then on, Gulliver received the highest treatment in Lilliput. This is the highest treatment in Lilliput. Gulliver moved into a Seaview mansion, and workers were burning the boiler, carrying bags of ingredients to the rooftop, and then pouring them into containers. Dozens of people worked hard, just to make a pot of coffee. What if it's hot outside? Then have hundreds of people create a manual fan. Gulliver pushed open the French windows, and the sea view was all in sight. The air was filled with the aura of the rich. Not only that, the king also built a theater for him, where the tiny actors performed Gulliver's favorite plays, including the Titanic, and fooled everyone, believing that this was his legendary life. The tiny people were deeply moved by Gulliver's experiences. When bored, he taught Horatio how to pursue the princess, and the awkward dances made by Gulliver, unexpectedly winning the princess's heart. Gulliver enjoyed his time in Lilliput, living the best day out of his life. You can imagine how happy he was. But after a few days, Lilliput's army suddenly found Gulliver's ship. The leading soldier was curious. Sliding to unlock the screen, there was a message from Darcy in Gulliver's phone, and Gulliver became excited. However, when he picked up the phone, he heard her reproachful voice, blaming Gulliver for causing trouble, and she had to clean up the mess herself, saying that she never wanted to hear Gulliver's voice again. Gulliver was very depressed, not knowing how to regain her heart, so he decided to stay in Lilliput for the time being, avoiding his own mess. The king was overjoyed to hear this, and he directly appointed Gulliver as a general, demoting General Edward Edwardian to deputy general, giving Gulliver full authority. General Edward Edwardian was so angry that smoke was coming out of his head, and he directly shut down the sea defense system of Lilliput, waiting to see how Gulliver would resist the troops of enemies. The enemy general was pleased to see this. Thinking that this was a good opportunity, he immediately ordered the invincible warships to attack Lilliput with full force. Countless bombs came flying, engulfing the entire kingdom in smoke. The king immediately sent Gulliver to the front lines. Gulliver thought, "Aren't these just a bunch of toy boats? I'll make them disappear in no time." However, when he turned his head, goodness gracious, the enemy warships were densely packed, lined up in a row on the sea's surface, making Gulliver feel dizzy, but he still toughened up and said, "No problem. A piece of cake." Gulliver took off his t-shirt, socks, and shoes, and it turned out that he had thought of a good way to deal with the enemy. A single man had to deal with 100 warships. Gulliver approached the warships, twisting his body into a pose and imitating King Kong smashing the sea, stirring up huge waves one after another. Seeing this, the enemy immediately rang the bell and opened fire. In the blink of an eye, Gulliver's big belly was hit by dozens of cannonballs. Just when General Edward Edwardian thought it was game over for Gulliver, he suddenly saw Gulliver's fat shaking, and all the cannonballs bounced back, blasting the enemy troops into disarray. Good God! Not only did it fail to penetrate his defense, but it also had a counter-armor ability. Gulliver was delighted. This is also possible. Next, Gulliver went into the sea, grabbed the ropes of all the warships' anchors, and used the warships as plows, dragging them all back, without harming even a single enemy soldier. He returned triumphantly. Gulliver was covered in bruises, celebrating with the soldiers by fist-bumping. Now Gulliver became a world-renowned combat hero, spending his days with the king, eating, drinking, and having fun. He even had a dedicated massage team, providing exclusive step-on massage service for him. Not only that, the king replaced all the city's advertisements with Gulliver's portrait, giving the feeling of New York Times Square. All kinds of Gulliver-themed merchandise were produced, and at this moment, Lilliput felt like Gulliver's world. The king stopped attending early court sessions. Gulliver found a sense of existence, deciding to revel in this dreamlike life. But the good times didn't last long. One day, a red robot suddenly appeared in the square, scaring all the tiny people citizens. They all scattered and fled. Gulliver didn't care at all. As it turned out, it was the previous general who found the model book on Gulliver's ship, and he used the blueprint to create the large robot. He was controlling it from inside. It turned out that Edward Edwardian, in order to regain power and status, collaborated with the enemy country to create a red mech to defeat Gulliver. Who is more powerful, humans or robots? The red robot transformed into a 2-meter-tall mecha, taller than Gulliver. This made Gulliver a little flustered. He went ahead and tried to push the mecha, but the mecha was standing still, and with one single punch, Edward Edwardian knocked Gulliver down. The mecha lifted Gulliver by his shorts and tossed him around in the air, worrying his man parts. Gulliver quickly admitted defeat and surrendered. The king and the citizens were greatly disappointed. And then Gulliver was thrown by Edward Edwardian to a distant and desolate island, and let the enemy took control of Lilliput. When Gulliver woke up again, he found himself in a pink room, wearing a princess dress, and suddenly the house shook violently. The next moment, Gulliver saw a giant girl appearing at the door, and it turned out to be the land of giants, Brobdingnag. They were at least 10 meters tall, and Gulliver was in a toy castle. Every day, he was either fed with milk or forced into a relationship. If he showed the slightest unwillingness, this would be his fate. After a few days, Horatio found Gulliver and asked him to return to save Lilliput. The most crucial thing was that Darcy was also captured by Edward Edwardian, so Gulliver found a glider, slid down from a high place, and ran out. He returned to Lilliput's cave and found his long-awaited crush. It turned out that Gulliver hadn't completed the mission, so she came to continue the mission, and mistakenly ended up in Lilliput and was captured. Darcy wanted to leave quickly, but Gulliver told her that they had to help the king reclaim Lilliput before they could leave together. So Gulliver once again challenged Edwardian one-on-one. Gulliver launched the first attack, rushing up and bear-hugged the mecha. But the power difference was too great, and he was pushed away violently. Then he gathered his strength and threw punches again. But unexpectedly, his hands were locked by the mecha. Edwardian activated the most powerful electric current, making Gulliver go crazy and nodding his head. And he fell to the ground in a 180-degree somersault. On the side, Horatio decided to take action. He rode his horse towards the mecha, seized the opportunity to throw a long hook, hooked onto the mecha, and successfully got inside to grapple with Edwardian. At the same time, Gulliver was caught in the mecha's bear hug, and then started a high-speed spinning carousel. Finally, it threw Gulliver around in the air and crashed onto the castle. Next, it's go time. Edwardian activated the strongest electric current, prepared to give Gulliver the final blow. But at the critical moment, the current suddenly disappeared. It turns out that Horatio turned off the main power at this very moment. Gulliver took the chance, quickly climbed up, rushed over, jumped up with both feet, and delivered a heavy blow to the mecha. Then pulled out the king's figurine, using the castle roof as leverage, locked onto the mecha's neck and relentlessly hammered it. The mecha was hit off balance, and fell to the ground. Gulliver then used a powerful finishing move, directly pressing down like a Tarzan, and removed the mecha's transformation disc from its waist. The mecha immediately reverted to its original form, but Edwardian was not dead yet. He still wanted to counterattack. He even kidnapped the princess. The princess rolled her eyes at him, and directly punched him to the ground. In the end, the two countries, under Gulliver's persuasion, turned their hostilities into friendship, becoming friendly brother countries. Led by Gulliver, everyone even started dancing in the square. Horatio successfully pursued the princess. Gulliver and Darcy bid everyone farewell, boarding a boat to return to the human world. They all lived happily ever after. The end. This film is called Gulliver's Travels. The question of this episode is, do you believe that there are giants or tiny people on Earth? Leave your answers in the comments. If you enjoyed the film, I recommend watching the original version. Alright, that's it for this episode. Remember to like and subscribe. See you next time. Bye.